Alright, let's see what to review today. Kinda burnt out from Iris 3, so let's pick something short. How about, Radiata Stories, an action RPG with a great art style and massive cast that... how about Stella Deus, an obscure Atlas strategy game with art and character designs by Shigenori Soejima? I'm not the biggest fan of the genre, but... Okay, there's gotta be something here. How about, Puzzle Quest! The first entry in an innovative series that took the casual concept of match 3 puzzle games and turned it into a full-fledged RPG with a vast story and cast. Yeah, that seems... Dang it, fine. Okay, I don't know, let's cover Maximo, I guess. Sure, whatever. You know, it feels like whenever people talk about series jumping to 3D, it's always the 5th generation of consoles. Sure, I mean, that makes sense. It was the first time 3D games were really viable and widespread, but that also means it was the era where developers knew the least about designing with the third dimension, and it showed. Sure, you had stuff like Mario 64 and Crash Bandicoot breaking new ground, but you also had stuff like Bubsy 3D and... that's about the only example I need, I think. With all the varying levels of quality from this era, it's no wonder some series looked at this and went, yeah, you know what? You guys can have fun. We'll be back when you figure stuff out. So when stuff got figured out and the 6th gen came along, those titles got out of bed and back to work. After all, with the experience developers gained from the 5th gen's experimentation, coupled with even stronger tech, surely older franchises could make an easier transition than they would have in the 90s. So how do you translate something like Ghosts and Goblins to 3D? Originally an arcade game ported to home systems, the most infamous of which being the NES version. A title that has gone down in history as one of the most unfair, unenjoyable, and unreasonably difficult games of all time. I'm sure there are people who think this game is fun for that, whether out of nostalgia or overcoming antiquated design or masochism, but there's a reason why people don't make games like this anymore unless they're trying to be deliberately frustrating. I actually tried playing a bit of it for this video and... yeah, no thanks. Honestly, I'm surprised the series took off, but I suppose there wasn't much else really of note out at the time. From the original's debut in 1985 to 1999, it got 3 sequels and 4 spin-offs on various consoles, all of which are much more worth your time than the first game. Just trust me on this one. This was a series with solid popularity, so it seems strange Capcom never brought it into 3D when that was a big deal. Heck, they made Mega Man Legends, and they still haven't finished it. Be cool if they could. Maybe they just couldn't find a way to capture that same experience as the 2D titles. So in 2002, they decided to give the task to an American team, and the result was Maximo, Ghosts to Glory. And before we get into the game itself, I just want to say how big a pain this title is to pronounce. Plurals of words that already have an S as the second to last letter are so irritating. So if it doesn't sound quite right as I go through the script, just know it's due to the frustrations of the English language. Apparently, this was originally going to be for the N64, but development issues caused it to be pushed back until the PS2, and was headed up by David Siller, who was mostly known as a producer on titles like the Arrow the Acrobat games, Zero the Kamikaze Squirrel, and the original Crash Bandicoot. This wouldn't be his first experience with the series, as one of his few credits as director would be on the 1999 Game Boy Color version of the original Ghosts and Goblins. He stated his goal was to bring back old school gameplay and use the opportunity to see what could be done with the series in a new setting. And not just being in 3D. Ghosts. Man, it's like trying to bite down on a plastic cup. To Glory does not see you playing as usual main character Sir Arthur. Instead, you play as King Maximo, a no doubt super manly man returning from super manly adventures to find his kingdom being under attack by evil wizard Achille. His army's in shambles, his castle's ruined, and his wife Sophia is being held captive. Then he dies. Man, I knew these games were hard, but I didn't think I'd lose before level 1. Luckily, thanks to Achilles' magic drill thing freeing souls from the underworld, the Grim Reaper makes a deal with Maximo. He'll return the Warrior King to life as often as he can so Maximo can stop Achilles and save the world. Not out of the goodness of his non-existent heart, but because he'll be out of a job if Achilles' plan succeeds. I actually love that. That's hilarious. With that out of the way, go. Man, after marathoning the Atelier Iris trilogy, it's nice to have a plot I can summarize in like one paragraph. Certainly a bit more complex than a demon king kidnapping a stupidly named princess, but just as straightforward. In terms of replicating the old style and structure of NES and arcade games, Maximo does a great job. Here's a bad guy. He's doing a bad thing. You are a good guy. Go beat him up. All you really need for a game like this. You do get a few more cutscenes between beating each world of the game, but they rarely add more context. It's more an excuse to show off the game's personality. Like one where Achille brings one of his undead minions back to life just to have him tortured to death. Okay, you know what? That was pretty funny. I like that. That being said, I wish there were more. The interactions and gags between characters are fun enough, but they just aren't very many, and Maximo himself is super boring. He's basically a beefy brick wall with a ponytail. I get your wife is kidnapped and the world's in danger, but lighten up, dude. But hey, the plot does its job, and its job is to set up Maximo's journey. There are 5 worlds in the game, each featuring 4 levels, a hub world, and a boss fight, much like the action platformers of old. Which is exactly what Maximo is, an action game that I don't think is quite a platformer, but is at least wearing the bow tie of one. You have a trusty sword, shield, you can jump. Yeah, that's about it, actually. When he meant old school, he really meant it. You do not have many tools to work with here. Maximo has some sword attacks, a ground pound, a shield throw, and you have to get through hordes of
spooky, scary skeletons
as you fight your way back to your castle. Get from one end of the level to the other, smack everything in sight, pick up all you can, good old-fashioned arcade experience. That being said, it certainly doesn't share the same design ideals as old arcade games, which are less focused on giving you a fun experience than finding as many ways to suddenly kill you as possible so you keep pumping coins into a machine. Nah, this is a game from 2002, so the actual challenge of the game is pretty reasonable. For one, you don't have enemies flying at you every which way, although they do pop out of the ground like extras in a no doubt killer metal music video. The opening levels are pretty chill, letting you get to grips with your capabilities as you make your way out of the graveyard. Said enemies tend to go down in 1 to 2 hits, maybe need to be knocked down and hit with a ground pound, but they crumble before long. Scatter, break, I don't know, they're a bunch of bones. But don't go thinking you can just hack away at them and be safe. There are plenty of different foes on your adventure, and one of the challenges of the game is not only figuring out how best to take down some varieties, but needing to do that while dealing with the platforming. It almost kind of reminds me of Ape Escape. That's kind of weird. Sure, you might think you're such a manly man for taking on unarmed skeletons and maybe even the ones with shields, but how about those pirate ones in World 3? Knock one on its back, you get damage when taking it out. That caused me quite a bit of pain until I realized I had to jump over them and attack the back. Then they fell on the sword tip, so that way I could get rid of them without any issue. Pretty neat little trick there, and there are several other enemies with special ways to fight them. These bomb guys hurt a lot, but you can't fight them up close because, you know, they'll explode, so you need to throw your shield. Some enemies can only be harmed with strong attacks or crouch attacks, and so on. It isn't much, but when paired with constant enemy encounters and managing your environment, it works very well with a simple control scheme. Except these mimics. Screw these things. These are awful. Why don't you go mimic one of the well-designed enemies? Another way Maximo eases up on his players is the health system. One of Ghosts and Goblins' more let's say unique traits is how they displayed health to the player, and Maximo follows on with the tradition. See, your health bar is divided into segments, which represent your armor. If you're down to your last segment, poor old Max is stuck running around in just his boxers. Not only does this mean he's probably violating some form of public indecency laws, but it also means you're not long from dying and going back to the nearest checkpoint. So, before the cops show up, you'd better hope you find an armor pickup and refill your health. Unlike the previous games, your armor doesn't function as extra hit points, breaking after one hit like it's made of antique china. Nah, they can take a few attacks before falling off this time. It's neat to see Maximo's model change as you find more armor. One section gives him the normal design, another gives him a helmet, and if you find an armor pickup, but you're at your current max amount, you get the Golden Armor of Love and Justice! This makes you invincible for 20 seconds. And that's it. And most of the time I found it when there were no enemies around, so fat lot of good it did. Sure, it's nice you have an invincibility power up, but 20 seconds is way too short for how slowly you move. Maybe increase it to like 40 seconds, but that might be a bit too long. Just longer than 20, because it takes Maximo forever to get anywhere. That's probably my biggest problem with Maximo's gameplay. He just controls a bit too heavily for my liking. I know this is more of an action game than a platformer, but I don't think he needs to feel like such a sack of potatoes. His jump especially, I just never really felt confident in jumping to farther platforms, even when I knew I could make it. There were a handful of moments in my playthrough where I was looking at a gap and wondering, I could probably make that, right? Looks a bit far off, though. Is there a closer platform? No, I guess I can make it. Oh, I did okay, well, okay, cool, I made that. His movement is functional, but I think they could have lightened him up a little bit and make the controls feel much more manageable. Even when attacking, sometimes the animations could get me hit because his recovery time is longer than you'd think. Sometimes I'd ground pound and get hit by something a second later because Max was still getting over his awesome skeleton killing skills. Again, not enough to ruin the experience, but when playing a game that's all about control and being in the moment, having responsive controls is paramount, and Maximo just feels a bit too sluggish and clunky for my tastes. At least the combat itself is fun. I mentioned a bit ago about picking up armor, but there are loads of other power-ups, from temporary sword elements to upgrades to your standard ability. A few of these are permanent up to a point, but some are lost upon death. Some powers include a treasure magnet for your shield, turning your throne shield into a tornado, increasing your ground pound's area of effect, stuff you don't need to progress, but just to make your battles a little more fun. You know, kind of a reward for managing to get it this far without dying. It does harken back to the older games giving you different weapons, but at least picking up the fire isn't a death sentence here, it actually helps you. Fancy that. There are even different forms for your golden armor of injustice! But I only ever found one. This weird skeleton thing. I don't know what the difference is, besides visuals. It looks cool. Overall, the combat's pretty fun, and slashing through Achilles' undead army with different power-ups is where this game really comes into its own. And if going through the regular enemies is fun, you'd think the boss fights would be really great, but not really. They were all super easy. I beat each of them on my first or second try. Shame, because I think they have the best designs, especially since they aren't just bigger skeleton goons. The first one is this big troll giant thing, I think. Really, I'm not sure. He has an AoE attack and smacks his shovel at you, but all you need to do is ground pound his toes twice and attack. Hit him with a strong attack and he goes down in about 3 strikes. Next is a voodoo priest, and he's alright. He shrinks Maximo down and can split himself into several copies with you needing to find the right one. It's actually kind of annoying since he moves faster than you. Other than that, no trouble at all. Then we have a ghost pirate in an underwater lair, and this one is kind of dumb. You need to hit him so he stumbles back into these little vents. Pretty obvious, right? But I couldn't figure out what I needed to do to damage him. I actually died trying to figure this out, using every different attack I had, and I just had to look it up online. Turns out, you can only hurt him with the crouching quick attack, which has never been useful until now. Like, they forgot about his ability to crouch and decided to utilize it as much as possible for this fight and the next world before forgetting about it completely again. Then there's this weird demon guy. Ew. His pattern is pretty obvious, you just need to wait for his flame breath and attack from behind, although I do like how the arena changes as you fight him. Then we have Achille, and he's just as easy as the rest. Nice job showing the weakness of your shield, dude. Really helped me finish you off. I appreciate it. The final boss is definitely the best one where, okay, spoilers. If you care, do you care about the plot? Probably not. When you rescue Sophia, she turns into a giant demon and fights you in the dark, with the only time she's visible being when lightning strikes outside and gives Maximo a brief glimpse of the horrible monster his love has become. It's still really easy, since it turns you towards her when she's about to attack, but this one is by far my favorite, just for the atmosphere. After you beat the first 4, you rescue one of the 4 priestesses. Oh right, Achille kidnapped them. They're important, I guess. And yes, their designs are very 80s, they all seem to share the same body model, and their lips don't move when they speak. I got enough cleavage from Grand Phantasm, dang it! When you find one, you get one of 3 choices as a reward. You can save your game for free, since saving the game normally costs you 100 coins in the overworld, get full armor, or a kiss. That last one might seem strange, seeing as one of Maximo's main motivations for going on this journey is saving his wife, but hey, fits the pulpy vibe you're going for. But what does the kiss do? It must be pretty great for you to pick it over full health or saving your game. So should the kiss be on your list? Probably not, no. The kisses don't do anything on their own, but you get a special bonus for getting all 4. I didn't do that, but I looked it up online and apparently all you really get is a gallery. So yes, you are essentially treating them as collectibles. Kind of gross. especially considering their designs. However, I will say the art style itself is really fun. Despite being developed by an American team, the character designs were done by Japanese artist Susumu Matsushita, with the rest of the art direction following suit. He's probably best known for his work on the Adventure Island series, but he's also made several mascots and other designs. His heavily westernized cartoon style really shows through here, and it still looks pretty good today. It's almost like someone took those old Hammer horror movies and turned them into a Saturday morning cartoon, which is a really good fit for the Ghosts and Goblins series. It also gives the character models more personality, like seeing Maximo's idle animations or some of the goofy expressions of enemies getting hit. This even carries over to the worlds themselves: a graveyard, swamp, frozen shipyard,
Hell itself.
and Maximo's castle all carry a distinct charm to them, even if they can look a bit primitive. Plus, they all carry some kind of unique stage gimmick to help them stand out, like the slippery ice physics in the graveyard of ships, or all the environmental hazards in the realm of spirits. Seriously, this is absurd. You've got like bear trap platforms and floating head statues shooting fireballs. Just like, gee, I know where we are, but this seems a bit excessive. The cutscenes themselves look a bit extremely rough. These would probably age the worst. There are barely any of them, but they look like partially melted action figures doing impressions of dying fish. One thing I really don't like about the presentation is the music. At least I think there was music. I remember hearing a remix of the old Ghosts and Goblins tracks, but either the rest blended into the background, or they just used the same song over and over until I didn't notice. What few, like 2 tracks I remember hearing were just kind of there. You know, for an adventure like this, the music needs to be more in your face and bombastic as opposed to brooding and droning. How could you try for atmosphere when ice block skeleton fishers are popping out of the water? Kind of makes the whole adventure feel flat for me. You know who they should have gotten to do the soundtrack? Ghost and Goblin. Fortunately, it isn't a deal breaker because Maximo Ghosts, hate that name, to glory as a whole is alright. I think the developers did a great job translating Ghosts and Goblins into 3D, although giving it actually decent design and making it reasonable to beat. The art style is fun, the levels are diverse, and it never really feels cheap. But at the same time, it feels a bit too much like what it is for my taste. It's certainly a 2002 action platformer on the PS2, and while I did have fun, it also just kind of happened. I'm not sure if I'll go back and replay it, but I didn't hate my time with it. I'd certainly play it over the 2D games, but that's not really saying much since the old games are... yeah, like that. If it shook things up a bit more with your abilities or challenges, maybe I'd be singing a different tune, but as it is, it's kind of forgettable for me outside of its context within the series. By all means, worth a playthrough if you're a fan of games for this era, but otherwise, meh. The same team would later make a direct sequel with 2004's Army of Zen, but I don't have it, so we aren't talking about it. I am interested in playing that game though, since this shows some real oh hey, Lunar! Why didn't I talk about this?